The unexpected deaths are always a bit more difficult. For me, the hardest thing is covering them with the shroud.
Put them away.
Yeah. Last moments of life, I think, is quite special.
Hi.
Malachi.
Christine, good to meet you.
How did you get into nursing?
I was never going to be a nurse, never. But I got a holiday job at the local hospital and I got quite taken by it. I trained at King's College Hospital in South London.
Where I'm working now.
Is it?
And
right.
Same uni. I was likewise sort of fell into it. I was a medic convert and basically fell in love with nursing and wanted that kind of patient contact more than the medical side of things.
Yeah. You're right. I think it was the people contact, especially if you see somebody get better, or even if you're able to help look after them not get better. It's a fantastic privilege, really.
Yeah.
On my very first ward, in fact, I nursed a 9-year-old who had her leg amputated. In fact, full amputation at the hip for cancer. And then when she got really sick, they said I was the person she felt safe when I was around, so I went quite often in my off duty until she died. And the fact that she was 9, that was really, really hard. I think I had a card from her mother just this week. Her mother's just over 100, so it's an amazing contact. I don't think there's any other patient I've had that level of contact.
I think it's nice that you can keep that kind of relationship with someone, like even after all this time. Do you take your work home with you?
Yes. Do you?
Yeah, I try not to. I think I have left it at the door when I leave work, but I think about things sometimes. It makes me appreciate my family a lot more, I think, when I've had something similar happen at work. I mean, it's difficult to date within work because it's such a high-pressured environment, and it being shift work, you struggle to be on the same shift. But I think it's also difficult to date outside of work because people don't understand. 13 hours, 4 or 5 times a week it adds up a bit.
I remember at my leaving party, my partner going around, he's not normally very extrovert, and I remember his going around saying to people, I know you're sorry she's leaving, but I'm getting her back. And I don't think it ever occurred to me quite what an impact on him that job had had. And I think it's a big issue for nurses that probably doesn't get talked about enough. And one of the good things about this somewhat monastic life we had when we had to live in the nurses' home and be home at 12 and so on, is that there was a sense in which we had a lot of almost co-counselling. We wouldn't have called it that. I can remember the first person who saw a death, and we all sat round and gave her coffee and asked her what it was like, and then when something went wrong, there was this natural group to share experiences, which is very hard to recreate, I think, in the current sort of shift systems and so on.
I mean, we don't even get time to really debrief after an incident on shift. I mean, we're almost so oblivious to it because it's our way of life. And I think, people are either very vocal and may leave, or they aren't vocal and accept it. But I suppose like you've found, you realise once you leave it, how much you missed. What are the difficulties in the doctor-nurse relationship?
Sometimes I think it's a very male-female relationship, even when they aren't necessarily the genders.
My perception before I had any sort of insight into it was very much based on what I've seen on TV. You are the doctor's aide, and you do this to help them and you do that to help them. And it's nothing like that.
Nurses often know far better than the doctor concerned, and yet the authority lies there.
It's still very difficult. I mean, we've had the first year out of medical school and they struggling to prescribe paracetamol. For them it was such a big thing, and for us we're kind of a bit like, but you're supposed to be the doctor. You're supposed to be the person that we go to for things. But I almost think that puts us down because nursing has so much knowledge.
Absolutely.
and so much skill. That,
Yeah. I remember once a patient, he'd had a couple of cardiac arrests, and he shook the doctor's hand and said, "Thank you, doctor, for saving my life." And then he turned to me and said, "Thank you, sister, for telling doctor to get a move on to save my life." And we're always taught that patients, here is the last thing that goes. And I can remember saying to this doctor who was standing nervously with the defibrillation pad, to get a move on, he's fading or he's gone or something. And he'd obviously heard that. Yes.
I think it's nice when you get the appreciation. One of my most moving sort of pieces of appreciation from sort of family was a teenager who'd lost her newborn baby. Had unfortunately tried to end her life, but she'd done it in such a way that meant that she wasn't able to go to her baby's funeral. She was too unwell to actually leave bed effectively. But we got her to have a viewing and spend time with her baby, and she was so grateful for that. She had a new lease on life afterwards.
Yeah.
She actively wanted to engage in rehab and get out and sort of carry on with her life. It kind of reinstilled in me the fact that I knew that this is what I wanted to do.
It's great when, given the pressures and the bureaucracy, it is possible still occasionally to make that space to do something extra special. How do you feel when a patient dies?
The unexpected deaths are always a bit more difficult, and the deaths of people that don't have anyone, so they might be the last of their family, or the family are abroad and things. I feel those sort of deaths more, provided I've been with someone as they've died. I normally feel quite, not satisfied, but relieved for them, I guess. One of my first shifts in charge, someone that was in their late 90s, and we just watched him get steadily more unwell for 3 days. And then his family coming in, and obviously because I was in charge, sitting down with the doctor and having to describe what had happened, and they didn't want to come in to collect his belongings. So obviously me and the actual nurse that was caring for him on that shift went in and sort of packed up his cards and his photos, and there's photos of him and his wife from when they were younger and things like that, and sort of putting them in a bag and closing that bag was difficult. Sometimes I think it's hard not to feel like you failed or missed something.
Yeah. Most people don't need to think about death, and it makes you think about your own and your family and loved ones, but also that person as being born or dying you're very vulnerable and dependent, and it's such a privilege to be able to help that moment be as good as possible.
Yeah, and even afterwards, I think people find it weird that I talk to people that have died. For me, the hardest thing is covering them with the shroud and taping. It's weird to tape.
Put them away.
Yeah,
almost, yeah.
Wrapping tape around a head is strange. Last moments of life, I think, being with someone who's quite special.
Absolutely. Do you think nursing is still seen as a feminine profession?
Yeah. I think it's come a long way, but my granddad was very much against it, as it was, for him, it was that feminine profession that has no progression and sort of no ceiling.
Do people call you the male nurse?
Yes.
I always think that's the most terrible phrase.
Didn't realise nurse had a gender.
On one level, it's not surprising. Most nurses are women. I think the numbers are something like 9 or 10%, and it hasn't budged.
No, I think they've just hit 10%.
Yeah, very, very rare in my training days. I think there was only one, and he worked in the VD clinic, which was in the basement. People don't talk about it very much, but a very significant number of the best of the chief executives in the NHS are nurses by background. What is the greatest threat to nursing as a profession?
I've gone into nursing because I want to nurse, and I want to provide care, and I want to do best by my patients. It's the expectation that we're supposed to cover 5 or 6 different job roles, and there's a risk of the profession getting lost as to what nursing is. And I can't do it when the bureaucracy and the red tape stop me giving my best care
I think the bureaucracy is probably one of the things that's changed a lot since I was actively nursing. The shortage has put the discussion about nurses higher on the agenda than it's been for several years. And again, people seem to default. They talk about the health service and they talk about beds and doctors often. And yet, I used to say when I was at the RCN, there are lots of beds in John Lewis across the road. Beds means nurses to look after people. Yeah. I have been a patient recently, and I've been overwhelmed with how good it is. And yet, if I look at the papers, the NHS is in absolute crisis and in decline and in a terrible state. I do think our press like bad news stories anyway, but I do think that most nurses I hear and talk to do feel that they're under much more pressure than they were a few years ago.
I personally am a bit worried about the state of the NHS. I think we've become quite good at papering over the cracks, so the issues perhaps aren't dealt with. We're not compromising on safety, but it's because we're working at 110%. I say it a lot, but I think it takes someone to die before anyone actually makes any changes or actually takes any interest in what people have been saying for months, sometimes years. I think it takes a lot of someone to maybe see some things we've seen or do what you do, and you have to be persistent. What is something about nursing that would surprise the general public?
How much fun it is, I think, sometimes. People talk about it being, oh, I couldn't be a nurse, you're wonderful to be a nurse, but actually it's not all doom and gloom, and some of it's great, fun.
What would you say to someone who's just starting their career?
You've chosen a fantastic job. Not many people have the opportunity to make such a difference. It's not an easy job or an easy life, but never doubt that you're doing a really, really good job.
Like, you as one person can change hundreds of people's lives, so just enjoy it.
A lot feels very similar to it.
Yeah.
But, maybe that's good, maybe it's not good.
I think the fundamentals are still the same, but there's just been a lot of progression.
So it's been really good talking to you.
And to you.
I don't really think I knew what was happening to start with. When we hit the IED, it went off, and I just remember sky, sand, and thinking, oh crap, am I dead? Am I dying? Like, not knowing like that. I think in that instant, I think definitely was my most afraid.